If you walk into our community of faith on any given Sunday morning, you may think, what in the world is this? It's very different. But underneath all of that is a foundation of who we are as United Methodists. And whether it's the teaching that I do on Sunday mornings, or how we're making disciples through small groups, how we're following up with one another, how we're celebrating Holy Communion and baptism, and anytime that we're receiving new members here, or anytime we're doing a baptism, I do the full liturgy. Even though we're what we call an alternative worship service, which is, we may call that post-contemporary, I still do the full liturgy for Holy Baptism that comes straight out of our book of worship. And I do that because it's a learning experience, and it's a way for us to be reminded of who we are. And everybody loves it, first of all. And everybody is able to celebrate in that because they know what this is about, what it means. Same way with Holy Communion. I will do the full liturgy on a number of times throughout the year. Then we may maybe do it a little more contemporary format. But everything that we do here is really based on who we are as United Methodist. Every Sunday night I do a thing called Faith Remix. And this is a reflective time where we gather together and we talk about theology, and it's all around our Wesleyan heritage and our Methodist doctrine. And so everybody gets to bring their questions. Everybody gets to we talk about what the framework of who we are as a Christ follower, what that looks like in terms of how John Wesley taught. We talk about prevenient grace and justifying grace and sanctifying grace, and all those things are woven in the teaching, but they're all to point back to who we are as United Methodists. How's our theology formed? What is a quadrilateral? All these kind of things are normal language that people hear speak because it's been taught in the course of who we are.
I think the focus on grace, is our distinctive Wesleyan theological understandings become very important in the development of our churches, and I think we have an opportunity as leaders to embody those, and that means that we have to nurture our own graced relationship with God. So part of the training that we provide, and I think coaching for church planters, is around their own soul care and how they're growing in their own faith development, and learning how through disciplines to self-differentiate so that they are not their church. They have a role in it, but they are first and foremost a child of God. And this is an expression of their calling. It isn't their calling. And I think to get that right in the beginning is tremendous. And every one of us has our own kind of spiritual disciplines or practices that foster that. One size doesn't fit all. But encouraging, leaders to figure that out, whether it's with the help of a spiritual director. There's a gazillion things that are written about the disciplined life. And I think asking the questions when we're working with church planners, how is it with your soul? And part of the benchmarks and the accountability that we look for with our church planners is not just about butts and seats or how much money comes in the collection plate, but how are you doing? And how are you caring for yourself and your family? How are you becoming a whole person? And what are the disciplines that you're incorporating that allow you to do that?
We had just launched, and it was bigger than I thought it would be, and it was harder. I was in seminary and with a new church and children and a husband, and it was about to do me in. And that district committee asked me, well, tell me about your Sabbath. Tell me about your spiritual disciplines. And I didn't have any. And I got defensive for just a minute, and then I realized that they were right. And so I also realized that in order to lead, I have to be healthy. And so I have been intentionally more focused on, I need to be in a small group. I don't need to be leading it. I need to be in it. And I need to be studying scripture. And so I have made huge strides in that. But because I was so weak in that, I certainly did not lead well in that. So I was very, not mean envious, but in a cool way envious of Ron Garner at G3,
Yeah.
because he came out of the gate with strong small groups, because it was a passion of his. A passion of mine is to reach unchurched people and help them fall in love with Jesus as we serve them and love them. So we were missional. We are missional with surface involvement of small groups. You know, like we had a few people in a small group, but we didn't have a lot of people. And so, you know, Ron and I are friends, and, you know, he was telling me one time how many people he had in a small group. I'm like, wow. You know, so then I realized I had not done some things that I should have done, probably. And so I read Effective Staffing for Vital Churches, and it talks about inviting, connecting, sending. And so one of the first part-time contractual positions that we hired last year was a connecting person. And I am thrilled to say that now adults, teenagers and adults in ongoing spiritual formation of some type, we have like 143. And then if you add the kids in their small groups, it's like 193, 200 people in a small group. And that's in a year, because of her intentionality and my new appreciation for what disciplines do. And the church is healthier because of it now. Pastoral care, I do very little of it because it happens in the groups. It really does look like the early church, because I finally got my head out of the sand and realized that it has to be holistic. And so I think that's one thing the disciplines and the discipline offers us, if we will let it.
When it's related to our polity, you know, everyone here knows that we're not just a church with inside the walls, that we're a church that's constantly lifting our eyes outside the walls, and that we're a part of something much bigger. We are a connectional church, so that we're connected to the United Methodist Church down the road. We seek out to be in mission with those churches, to be connected with those churches and have great success with that. They understand that we are a part of the Northern Piedmont District. They understand that district is a part of the Western North Carolina Conference. In other words, it becomes a part of who we are as our community. Now, our community of faith may look different than First Church in X town, USA, but it is still United Methodist Church at its very core. What we have also started doing on Sunday mornings, instead of having two identical services, most people come to me all the time and say, man, we want to come to talk to you about how you're doing contemporary worship. And I said, well, I don't even know what contemporary worship is anymore. You know, we call it post-contemporary, alternative, whatever, and then you get these deer in the headlight kind of looks. But one of the cool things that we're doing now, we have taken our 9 o'clock service and we are asking the question, what do more of our traditional elements that we celebrate and love in our United Methodist Church look like represented in our context? And so our 9 o'clock service, we call it a modern service now, and it's full of liturgy. It is led by the laity. It looks very different than our 11 o'clock service. It has got hymns only done on the keyboard, whereas the 11 o'clock service we're doing, you know, full band and everything. So while other churches are trying to figure out how to do contemporary worship, we're a church that's trying to ask the question, what does our Methodist heritage look like in our context, celebrated in a more contemporary way? And that's been a really cool theological experiment, if you will, and people really liking that. That service has grown to about 67, 70 people, and it's engaging more folks who don't like the loud music, but they really like the more contemplative service, or they like the liturgy. It's been a really cool opportunity for us to celebrate who we are as United Methodist.
You know, there's less shalls and more shoulds in the discipline than there was years ago when I started in ministry, even in terms of the way you structure your governance in a local church. I've heard people say to church planners, don't rush to charter, because until you charter, you can really be very flexible in terms of how you structure the life of your church. But once you charter, then the shalls or the shoulds of the discipline become effective in terms of, you know, what your governing board looks like and the various committees that you have. And I say to church planners, resist all that as long as you can until you just can't do it anymore. Structure is helpful, but I remember talking to a church planner who set up a SPRC, even before he chartered SPRC, Finance Committee trustees, all these kinds of committees. And most of them were populated by people who were not United Methodist, and so they didn't really understand what all those things were. But he felt like, he needed to be United Methodist Church, he needed to start with structure. And it didn't help, because it added a layer of work and bureaucracy to a church that really at that point needed to focus on relational building and outreach and evangelism. So I think I think our discipline provides us with good guidelines and guidance in terms of how we have the checks and balances, in terms of how we handle finances and safe sanctuaries, and what are the boundaries and what are the boundaries that we need to abide by in order to be healthy and whole as a community of faith.
Well, one thing it's done is it's caused us to have a very clear and tight structure. So we have come in and we have developed what the polity is going to look like, and how that polity parallels the already established polity of the United Methodist Church that we find in the Book of Discipline. So how can we parallel that? How can we use that to our advantage rather than seeing it constraining us? So as far as structure is involved, it's been a very disciplined process to name exactly what the processes are going to look like for leadership and for people to serve in different areas of ministry. One thing that I really appreciate about the Methodist Church, especially today, is that, again, the polity is not a police. So it doesn't hamper you, it doesn't cause you from living into the vision. As far as with a Wesleyan heritage and with the Wesleyan theology, that there's a lot of grace and there's a lot of gray area as far as the discipline is concerned. So I see today that the key element for the United Methodist Church is just fruitfulness and effectiveness. So as long as you see those components, you don't necessarily have to be hampered by the discipline.
There's some things in the discipline that we don't have, but, our social principles, we are, again, unabashedly United Methodist. I think we can use it to be a rule keeper, or we can use it to be a foundational tool. And I like it I value it as a foundational tool, because I think that's what it's intended to be, not this rigid yes or no thing.
Our current bishop here in this conference, Larry Goodpastor, wrote a book called There's Power in the Connection. And he makes a great point in that book that the discipline was written under a particular context in a particular culture in which we no longer live today, in today's society and culture here in America. So what I would suggest is that you take the discipline and use it as a starting point, but don't see it as something that handcuffs you from doing what you need to do to be effective and fruitful in your context and in the environment in which you are starting this new community of faith.
Our disciplined heritage gives us a framework to support what the church is called to do. We talk about our theological task, we talk about our doctrine, we talk about who we are as United Methodists, we talk about what does it look like to be a faithful follower of Jesus Christ. All of those provide us a framework to actually do something. And sometimes I think in the church we forget to do something. We like to celebrate all these things, but we find ourselves sitting in a pew or sitting in a chair and saying, oh, well, that was a really nice service. Where we are different, we really put both of those two things together and remind ourselves who we're called to be as Christ followers. It's not just that we follow Jesus inside the walls of the church, because most of the time you're not going to find Jesus in the church. You're going to find Jesus already at work somewhere outside the walls of the church. So our work is to discover where Jesus is already at work and go and join him there. So ways that has made us missional, by learning more about our community that we're serving. We know that there's addiction problems, and so we've got addiction ministries that have emerged here in a missional way, not just in downtown Greensboro or in downtown Burlington, but right here in the hub of our church. We have weekly meetings that take place. The same is true for homelessness and hunger. Greensboro, if you don't know this,
was in 2013 named the second hungriest place in the United States. So we have got a food pantry. We're also partnered with other United Methodist churches in our district trying to fight the hunger problem. We have 2 homeless ministries that we're heavily engaged in, not only in Burlington, but in Greensboro. We have a group of people who feel called to this. And we work every Saturday night to do church under the bridge in downtown Greensboro, where we help other people set up and do church underneath an overpass for 200 homeless people. And so they're fed every Sunday night or every Saturday night. And we do a worship service. We provide the teaching, the music, we set up the chairs, everything. And our church alone tries to sponsor 4 of those services every year. So we're doing not only the music and the teaching and the setup, but we're providing the meals for that as well. We also support Street Watch in downtown Greensboro, helping this organization get homeless people off the streets. We're working constantly with the Salvation Army through Night Watch, feeding folks that are homeless on Friday nights. So we're constantly working to try to answer the question, what does it mean to be a faithful follower of Jesus Christ within the framework that's been provided by the United Methodist Church? But how do you translate that into becoming a missional church? How do you put all that into action? And we've been trying to answer that question in a variety of different ways that lead us to address a lot of social justice issues on a lot of fronts. Whether it's LGBTQ communities, we last year became a reconciling congregation. That has happened over a process of time where we're welcoming everyone. Everyone means everyone welcomed at the table. And so that was another way for us to begin to flesh out what it looks like to be United Methodist, but what it also means to reach those who are on the margin. And as you know, right now there's a lot of tension over the discipline in that whole LGBT fight. And so we're not trying to fight a fight or anything like that. We're just trying to be faithful and extend the hand that was first extended to us. I tell folks that all the time. That's just who we're called to be as Christ followers. Somebody reached out to you, and that was Christ reaching out to you. And so how do we extend that hand that's been first extended to you, no matter who is on the other end of that? And that calls us to action. It's always a call to action. There's no way around that.